Hey, what's up guys? Noted Investor here. Time for a market update, and we've got quite a bit to cover, so I will get right to it. So we're going to look at the BTC chart. I'm going to talk about the global markets in light of the recent action we're seeing in regards to the coronavirus, the response there. Huge number of companies really starting to take cautionary measures, so I'll go into that. And of course, some of the altcoins that are really rocking today, a few names we've been looking at that have continued to move higher. Aeon, BitShares having a big pump today, Engine, Litecoin, some of the others. And what is going on here near term? The market is feeling a little choppy, a little rocky. So let's take a look at that first. Looking at the 1 hour chart here, and I'm showing the 1 hour chart to make a point, to show some granularity here. Since the pullback that we saw, which culminated in this nice little double bottom last weekend, we had a very steady climb up for most of the week. It was very clean, good pullbacks. It got a little shaky, but just continued to make higher highs and higher lows. And then after we hit this $9,400 mark right here, look at how choppy the price action has been. There's been these big fake outs, the big shakeouts, and it's just a change in the tone of the overall market here near term, and potentially a little bit of a near term reversal period. And that's what tends to happen. The market goes one of three ways. We're either in an uptrend, in a downtrend, or we're in these periods of transition, and sometimes they're just pauses that set up for a continuation move, and other times they're transitions which set up for a turn to the downside. And so that's what I'm keeping an eye on right now. Things are feeling a little bit choppy, a little bit shaky, but there's certainly not a clear turn in the trend just yet. You'll see that when we look at the daily time frame. But I wanted to point this out here as far as the near-term price action. Certainly seeing some change in character here. You could even almost argue there's a little bit of a head and shoulder type pattern on the 1 hour, although not a very deep one, and it certainly doesn't look that way on the 4 hour or the daily chart. So the first clear level to be watching are these prior lows back in here. This is the high that we saw on January 18th. You can see that was the big breakout here where we had massive volume come in on the 28th, and there were many attempts to shake down to that level, all of which have been bought up so far. So that $9,200 mark is the first big support level. If price starts to break below that, then you really want to zoom out and look at the daily chart for some bigger clues on what potentially could be the next major support levels on the way down. The moving averages have continued to hold and continue to do that, so that's what I would be using on the way up. So let's zoom out, look at the higher time frames here, starting with the 4 hour chart first. The near term action here, the 10 EMA is still above the 22 EMA. Price is still technically trending higher, but we can see there's been a change in character here. The moving averages are now going sideways here for the last day and a half or so, as price has just kind of consolidated in this choppy range. Again, the first major support that I'd be using is at 9,200, but if you wanted to play it really tight, if it starts to close below this 22 EMA, which at this point is basically 92.90, that could be the first early signal that this is going to start to change the trend, and then we'll begin to see this lower lows and lower highs pattern starting to set up. How low does it go if we start to see that is the big question. And again, I'd be using those major support levels on the daily charts, and that's what I'm going to be using as my guide. The 10 EMA, mind you, is still down here at just below 9,100, so even a pullback to that level is not that big of a deal, and we can see that there is a first big support in and around here, basically around 9K 8,900, and that's also keep it above the 22 EMA on the daily. And the daily trend still very much in an uptrend. You're making these higher highs, higher lows, and these pullbacks have proven to be these buyable levels. At some point that will change, but until it does, you got to give the benefit of the doubt to the bulls, who continue to show surprise to the upside, some renewed strength. Every time it pulls back, you see those quick pops up. The RSI did again reach that 70 level, not tremendously overbought or extended. It is pulling back here a little bit as this pause over the last couple of days, this sideways action. So certainly has room to run if price continues to go higher. And then on the upside, clearly 9,500 was that level to be watching, and that lines up with a significant overall resistance level. that was that base here over that big descending triangle we saw in the summer of 2019. That was the big breakdown point. We saw a brief rally over that level, but just couldn't really sustain it. And now that we have retraced to that point, this has been near-term resistance here again, pausing in and around that 9,500 level. Above that, next major level really is around 10K. And so if it can break to the upside here in the next few days, then we're looking at a shot to 10K as your next major target. But I want to point out a pattern, and I posted this on a tweet yesterday here, and you can see this on the daily or the weekly. I'm just going to use the weekly for simplicity's sake here, just to keep it a little bit cleaner here. And let me take the volume off. I'll hide those moving averages as well, just to keep the chart clean. But what I personally would like to see, if price pulls back, this would be interesting to see if we get a big inverse head and shoulder forming. And I'm sure you can see that here, but what we'd be looking at is first this major resistance level here. Let me mark that up with this guy. And this is basically right where we're seeing the price pause in and around here, right? So this 9,500 level would be, you know, lines up pretty well with some prior significant points. Again, I showed that on the daily chart. That was that 9,500 and change level, which will support the big breakdown point. Again, resistance on the way up recently. And it'd be interesting to see if we get this first dip as the shoulder, this potential big base, which also had its own little mini inverse head and shoulder here on the daily chart as that big head. If we start to see a pullback, do we get that right shoulder forming? And if that's the case, that in my opinion would set up for a very bullish breakout, especially with the timing. This would start to form just before the halving, and a measured move on this pattern projects to around 12.5 as your first target. But in reality, if it hits 12.5, in my opinion, the highs of last year around near 14K are just really not going to hold. I expect price would break out at that point, and then you'd be looking at a play to the bigger target, which is the old all-time highs. And I expect maybe we'd see that after the halving, but that would be a significant pattern within the bigger scheme of things to be watching here. And that also lines up, you know, with this big kind of symmetrical pattern we're seeing form here on the broader Bitcoin chart. You know, this also would be a pattern within a pattern. So just a real interesting setup here. I personally would like to see a pullback at this point from this resistance level, maybe 1 or 2 weeks of pause that would really set up for that right shoulder. And then we'd like to see volume come in as it starts to push higher if that pattern plays out. How low could that right shoulder form? Traditionally, I would use a fib ratio on that, and anywhere between the halfway point to the 618 is what I like to use on that. There's two ways to measure that. You can go wick to wick on the exact points there, which puts, you know, the 50% around 8K and the 618 around 7,600. In my opinion, that's a little too deep. I would use the start of the impulse leg, which would be the bottom of this candle. And by that I mean the move that really started this most recent rally. I'd be measuring Fibonacci retracements against that. And in that scenario, then you're looking at a pullback at the 50% being around 8,200 and the 618 being around 78 or 7,900. So that puts it again right around that between 8K and 8,200. And ideally, that's where you'd want to see that right shoulder formed and then a break to the upside. And that would really set up for this big inverse head and shoulder. Again, it could just keep going higher. The momentum certainly favors the bulls. You could just see a little bit of a higher low form here and then the breakout. But if we start to see that pause, I think a deeper pullback back into the 8Ks would erase a lot of the euphoria we've seen here recently, the over bullishness, as we've had a very strong week coming on the back of a very strong January overall. I mean, Bitcoin was up nearly 30% for the month of January. A very strong move. Many of the altcoins have also followed suit and shown very strong moves off of the lows. And so there certainly is this very bullish sentiment that has really taken hold of the markets here in the last week or two. And I think a pullback down to this level would neutralize some of that. But if you're keeping an eye on the bigger picture, that's what I'd be watching for, a potential right shoulder to form and then a powerful move on the upside. At that point, you're talking a bigger, longer move, multi-month, if it breaks out of the pattern that's this long, because this pattern goes back to September. And so a move out of a big base like that would really set up for a much longer term bull run at that point. So that's what I'm looking for here. Those are just some thoughts in the near term on BTC. Again, one day at a time. I'd be watching this very short term action for now, because so far the trend is your friend. The higher highs and higher lows continues to play out, and until that changes, you got to go with the momentum and the direction of the momentum. Looking at the broader markets, however, the global stock markets, we're seeing a lot of companies respond to this coronavirus, and of course the epicenter is China, but we can look at the map and see that it really has spread, not in the numbers anywhere near to what you're seeing in the Asia region, but certainly it's touched just about every continent on the globe now. That you've got Australia, you got the US, you've got Europe showing confirmed cases of the virus, and of course the epicenter here is the Asia region, China mainland here, but it's quickly starting to spread to the surrounding areas, and that is causing some panic both in the tourism industries as well as a lot of companies. And we're seeing the big tech companies close their offices, asking their employees not to travel to China. We're seeing a mandate, work from home. You're seeing quarantines. You're seeing these extended breaks in a lot of the companies based out of China. The manufacturing plants are shutting down temporarily, and as a means to try to put a squash on this whole spreading and the contagion that we're seeing. And it's just causing this near-term panic. And despite the blowout earnings that we saw in names like Apple this week, Tesla, Amazon, you're seeing the market pull back a little bit here in response to the virus here. And even Amazon had massive breakout over that 1900 level, right over to $2,000, but also pulling back. But if you look at the broader indices, they have started to pull back off of their all-time highs in the last week because of what we're seeing here, this broader tension showing up from the virus. So is this something that ultimately tops the market, right? Does this put the brakes on this big run we've seen? There's the election coming in here towards the end of the year. There's still the geopolitical tensions and some other things going on. And so it's going to be interesting to see if, in retrospect, this black swan event that no one really expected or was on the radar turns out to be the issue that ultimately caused the markets to top. And of course, things like gold and Bitcoin traditionally have been some of that safe haven assets. We've seen that here near term, both gold and Bitcoin responding in tandem to things like the Iran missile issue and now some of this virus response and the markets pulling back. The question is, will they remain in that mode? Will they continue to be this kind of near-term safe haven assets? With crypto, I'm a little bit more cautious because the Asian markets play a significant role in the cryptocurrency space in terms of the overall volume. If the major exchanges and a lot of the major traders down in the area that are being affected right now decide to take a pause or reprioritize some of their activities due to what's going on, will that spill over into the crypto markets because of the declined volume? And that's just something to make note of. It certainly is a possibility, just because the volumes that come out of the region are certainly notable for crypto and many of the altcoins that we are often following here trading. So just something to make note of there. I do think it would cause an impact to the crypto market as well. I think it would see some downside pressure if this really starts to escalate and we see the containment of this pandemic start to lose ground, and we start to see more countries impacted here, especially in the Pacific region here in Asia and in India and South Korea and Japan and all that. So just a very interesting time right now. There's always something going on, but this is notable and worth keeping an eye on here, in my opinion. But looking at the overall market here, we are seeing the market indices starting to roll over here, show a little bit of caution. The trading bot status, the daily one has been long since, for the past week here. The 4-hour one I noticed went flat yesterday and then quickly went long again. So it is getting choppy, starting to respond to some of that whipsaw that we're starting to see here on the short-term time frames, which I showed at the beginning of the video. Right now it's long again, but I expect that if it breaks below that 9,200, this will go flat, and likely the daily chart will as well. But some of the alts are still trending well versus Bitcoin, holding up very nicely, but it's mostly small cap names right now. Look at the list on the trending automated trading list here. We have BitShares, which had a big spike off the lows, but you know, NAM, Monocoin, WAN, Engine, Lend, Nano, there's a name from yesteryear, and just a lot of smaller cap names that are coming off the lows. Zill, you still have a few bigger cap names that have been leaders as of late. Litecoin, Zcash, Quantum's actually looking pretty good. Icon has had a big spike, but looks toppy in my opinion. Monero's still going. So it's a mixed bag, but it certainly is the smaller cap space that is taking the way here. Let's look at a few of those real quick before we wrap this up. Looking at Aeon, it's been on the radar for the last 2 weeks or so as it's been showing up on this trending list, but we can see here's this big spike here today. It's just kind of picking up that momentum, took a little bit of a pause and really starting to break through. Let me add those indicators back on. There we go, showing the volume there, and the volume just continues to spike, and it's really taken a big switch here. It was really quiet volume here up until, you know, at the start of the year things really started to take off, and it's been reflected there, and price just continues to move. On the daily chart, of course, it looks like the start of something much bigger. It's, you know, very much coming off the lows. I mean, look at this longer trend. Many of the alts look this way, but if you really zoom in, especially on a percentage basis, these are substantial moves. But we've seen these here in the past, these very quick spikes, short-lived. Is this the one that finally starts to grab some traction, get some legs? What I'd be looking for is how does it respond to the pullback? So far, the pullbacks have been minor. You had another big move higher. If it pulls back here, does it hold above this little breakout point around that 1,000 sat level and then keep going? That's what I'd be looking at for most of these that are starting to come off the lows. Is this a sustainable change in trend, or is this just another short-lived spike off the bottom? This one looks pretty strong in my opinion. Some of the other ones that are on the list here, looking at names like NEM, there's a name from yesteryear also trying to clear some resistance here in the near term. Big volume off the lows, but again, I'd like to see it clear that before I really started to look at anything aggressive on that one. BitShares, not sure, I haven't researched this yet, not sure if it was news or what's driving this spike here today, but coming in here on the daily, massive move off the low. Looking at names like Litecoin, first versus BTC then USD, has been an outperformer versus Bitcoin. Did see a pullback here for about a week and a half and then a big spike here in the last couple days. Very good, and certainly changing the trend as it starts to test this resistance. It's turning the corner here. You're seeing this lower lows, lower highs, finally starting to change that trend on the daily chart. Made a high, higher low, starting to make higher highs. And so this is encouraging in the big picture of the overall alt space, because, you know, for the last year or so, it's just been this steady decline. We're finally starting to see some of these form a bottom and a low versus Bitcoin. I'd like to see some more outperformance there. Another one is ETH BTC here, still setting up versus Bitcoin. Keep an eye on this one here. It had that strong move off the low and has just really been sitting tight. Very clear resistance level here around that 196 level on the Bitcoin pair. Breaking above that would be positive, and I'd be looking at these upper levels as the next major target here. And then Icon, looking at ICX here, has had a massive move higher, but I'd be waiting for this one if you're interested, because this one looks parabolic and looks very toppy in my opinion. The RSI got way up there at 90, just not sustainable. Best case scenario, it just sits tight near the highs and goes sideways, consolidates. At that point, I'd be looking at the lower time frames, maybe the 4-hour chart, for a continuation pattern, ascending triangle, something like that. But this one does feel a little toppy here. But what I'm going to be looking at here are those names that have not really participated, but I'm looking at them more from the USD side as they've sat tight, potential breakout candidates that could play catch up here. This is ICX on the daily USD pair, also looking a little bit toppy there, very extended near term. So looking at some of the other candidates, I'm going to go from the USD side. Names like Basic Attention Token has been sitting tight here for the last couple of weeks, not really participating. And in fact, if you look at the BTC pairs, they look pretty weak compared to Bitcoin. But I'm keeping an eye on these from the USD side, because if they start to break out here, these may be the names we see some rotation going into, and potentially on the BTC pair, they'll turn the corner and start to play some catch up here. So that's what I'm looking for, a potential hedge against what we're seeing on the pause in Bitcoin and some of these other names that have had very strong runs here as of late. Another one would be Link, looking at it from the USD side as well. Sitting tight, continues to make higher highs, higher lows. I'm watching this pullback here, and this is also lining up with some prior highs. Breaking out above this level, which is basically that $3 mark, would really look positive for the overall picture. And then at that point, I'd be looking at a run to around $4. And so that'd be a pretty significant percentage move there. 0x, another popular name that is in the similar category. Zooming in here on the daily chart, has pulled back, but starting to form a little bit of support here on this daily chart just above the 22 EMA. We want to see some follow through now to the upside, but definitely one to keep an eye on here in the near term. So it's certainly a mixed bag. There's been some very strong moves this week. Cardano was one of the big winners. Again, patience paid off on that one. Rallied straight to the target there. We'll see if it can continue. EOS has continued to look good on the USD side. Pulled back versus Bitcoin here a little bit, but did finally hit that second target. Almost got to that 445 mark, but there have been some good moves all around. Back to Litecoin here on the USD side. And I'm jumping around a bit, I know. I'm just trying to go quickly here to cover quite a few names as quickly as I can. But again, Litecoin, very strong move. Big push after pulling back here. And the pullback entries here are when they finally break trend for me. I don't usually wait until it breaks the old high. If it's pulling back, I tend to wait for the break of the trend, especially if the volume starts to confirm that. And so that's where I like to look for these, is when they break trend, especially if the volume's there and above the prior candle. So it held the moving averages beautifully and just continues to run higher. The next major target here is around that $77 or so. We'll see if it gets there, but just continues to push through. And so there's been some good moves. Again, it's kind of choppy here on the Bitcoin side, but it's not bearish yet. And certainly in the alt space, there's a lot of names that continue to look very strong. A couple of more here that I'm watching is Stellar here, maybe coming off the lows after this pullback here. So definitely keep an eye on that one. And Mana, I'm actually watching Mana from the USD side, but keep an eye on this downtrend here on the BTC pair. It's still very much in a technical downtrend. The moving averages are trending lower, but it is trying to find a little bit of support here. And on the USD side, again, this falls in that same camp as those names that have held tight here relative to the USD pair, while Bitcoin has rallied this week. This is one I'd be watching here, breaking above this little near-term resistance, call it around 38 cents or so. Could really kick off the next leg higher here. Again, this one has some fundamental catalysts with the launch of the public launch of Decentraland being opened up, and so we could quickly see 4.5 cents on this guy if we get some excitement and some volume going. So definitely watching the markets from both perspectives today and going into the weekend. I am cautious, as this says here, but I'm also looking at some of these alts that maybe could be the rotation names. But for now, I'm going to take it a little bit slower, just see how this plays out. And ideally, I'm going to be keeping an eye on the BTC pair here on the shorter time frames to see how this near-term pattern plays out. What would negate this would be, getting back over that 9,500 level and really starting to hold above it would really look positive. And closing below 9,200 again would really start to look negative. We could see the broader trend start to shift. So those are my thoughts on the general markets. Let me know what you think in the comments, especially on the bigger chart here, this big potential inverse head and shoulder that we're going to be watching out for if we see that pullback start to play out. Curious to think what you guys think. Are you guys generally more bullish, more bearish here, or a little bit neutral as we are at some near-term resistance? So thanks for watching as always. I will see you all in the next one. Take care, everyone.